She understood every word he said. That was the problem. The Korean businessman had leaned toward the man beside him and said something cruel, quietly in a rough harbor dialect that only Korea's dock workers spoke, a language he was completely certain no foreign waitress could understand. He called her a painting, decoration, something to look at, not something that listened. He was right about most foreign waitresses. He had no idea that the black American woman refilling his water glass spoke 8 languages, that she had stood in rooms more dangerous than any boardroom he had ever sat in, that the dialect he'd chosen to humiliate her in was one she knew better than he did. And he had no idea she was making a decision, because answering him meant breaking the one rule that had kept her alive for 3 years. Never be remembered. Never give anyone a reason to look twice. The moment someone looked twice, they might keep looking. And if they kept looking, they might find what she had buried. The real name. The real past. The reason she had erased herself from every record on earth and vanished into a restaurant 10,000 miles from the people who murdered her father. She set the crystal pitcher down on the silver tray, slowly, deliberately, and 6 of the most powerful men in Seoul had no idea they were watching a woman decide to stop hiding. Then she turned around. What she said next, in that same harbor dialect, in a voice as calm as still water, would freeze the entire room, pull the most powerful man at that table permanently into her orbit, and set in motion 8 days that would tear down a criminal empire 30 years in the making, and force her to finally face the one thing she had been running from since the night her father died. But none of them knew any of that yet. All they knew was that the painting had just started talking back. Welcome to Afro Soul Tales. If you're new here, please like, subscribe, and drop a comment below. Stay with us through this story. The name on file at the Velvet Crane was Jasmine Carter, 34 years old, American, English language tutor on weekdays, waitstaff 3 evenings a week for the past 22 months, work permit in order, rent paid in cash every month for a small apartment in Mapo district, 4th floor, south-facing, a unit with 3 deadbolts on the door and blackout curtains on every window in the place. The other waitresses at the restaurant had tried, in their kind and persistent way, to include her. We're going to the night market Sunday. Come with us. There's a new cafe in Hongdae that everyone loves. You have to see it. My cousin's birthday is Friday, and honestly, you'd like him. I'm serious. She always smiled when they asked. She always declined. Not coldly. Never coldly, because cold attracted attention, and attention was what she couldn't afford. She declined with enough warmth that the invitation felt received, and just enough distance that repeating it felt somehow unnecessary. She was liked, in the particular way that people like a beautiful view they understand they cannot get closer to. Appreciated, gently held at arm's length without ever being able to say exactly when or how the distance had been established. At night in the apartment with the 3 deadbolts, Jasmine Carter did not sleep the way ordinary people slept. She slept in increments, fully clothed some nights, waking at intervals she had trained her body to maintain. Each morning she checked 3 things before she did anything else: the locks, the phone, and the thin folder kept beneath the false bottom of the nightstand drawer. Inside the folder, the remnants of a life she had burned, a birthday card she had kept because she couldn't destroy it. It said, in handwriting she knew better than her own, that he was proud of her every day, and that this was not dependent on anything she accomplished. Just proud. Because she existed. A photograph with the faces cut away, a handwritten note in a cipher that she had memorized so completely she could have destroyed the physical paper 3 years ago. She kept it because the act of holding it was the last physical thing that connected her to the person who had written it, and letting go of it felt too much like the final kind of letting go. Her father. She thought about him every night, and every night she compressed the thought back into somewhere smaller, darker, managed, because grief was a luxury that required stillness and safety, and she had neither. And the people who had taken him from her were still out there, still powerful, still certain she was gone for good. Her job was to keep them certain. 2 nights after the dinner at the Velvet Crane, her phone lit up with an unknown number. The message was 4 words. Someone is looking for you. She read it twice, set the phone face down on the table, stood up, walked to her kitchen, poured the glass of water she'd been about to drink straight down the drain. The appetite for it was simply gone. She stood at the sink for a long time, looking at nothing. Then she went to the window and checked the street below. 4 days later, Min-jae Seo walked into the Velvet Crane and sat in a corner table in her section. He hadn't announced himself. No reservation under his name. He appeared at the early edge of the dinner hour, before the room filled, at a table in the lower section that she was assigned that evening. And when the hostess moved toward him with the clear intention of relocating him to the premium window position he always used, he shook his head once and said, "Here is fine," with the polite finality of a man who had made a decision. Jasmine didn't recognize him when she came through the kitchen pass. She was carrying 2 plates and the section lighting was deliberately low. When she turned to take his drink order and registered his face, something shifted in her chest. Not quite fear, but the precise awareness of it. The particular alertness of someone trained to recognize when a situation has changed while its surface has not. She smiled. "Good evening," she said in Korean. "Can I get you something to drink while you look over the menu?" He looked up and answered her in Japanese. "Water, please. Still." A test. Transparent enough that she nearly smiled for real. She answered in Japanese without any pause, as if the language shift had simply not occurred. "Of course. I'll be right back." When she returned with the water, he had moved to Mandarin. "Is the fish fresh today?" "Arrived this morning," she replied in Mandarin, setting the glass down. "I'd recommend the sea bass. The chef does something with ginger and black bean that's worth the visit." He looked at her differently then, not with fascination, not the curious collector quality she had braced for, but with the expression of a person who has just heard something resonate deeper than expected. The expression of someone for whom this means something specific. He waited until she pulled out her notepad. "You have a remarkable ear," he said back in Korean. "Thank you. Will you be dining alone this evening?" "Yes." A beat. "What else do you speak?" She tilted her head. "English, obviously. Some French. Basic Swahili. Enough Arabic to apologize convincingly." The corner of his mouth moved, not a full smile. The architecture of one. "Why Seoul?" he asked. She deflected it the way she deflected everything personal. Counter with a non-answer that sounded like one. "Why not Seoul?" she said lightly. "Best food in the world. I'll give you a few minutes with the menu." She walked away before he could continue. From the kitchen entrance, she watched him briefly. He appeared to be reading the menu. He was not reading the menu. She could see the quality of stillness in him. The kind that existed when a mind was working hard on something that wasn't in front of it. Powerful people went quiet like that when they were calculating something large. She wondered how much he knew. She decided to take his order and find out what came next. He came back 6 more times over the following 3 weeks. Always her section. Always early evening. Always alone. Each visit developed the pattern of a game that neither had formally acknowledged. He tested her languages. She passed every test. He asked questions that skimmed the surface of her past. Careful questions. The kind designed to produce telling reactions rather than information. And she answered with the grace of someone who had spent years constructing a version of herself that was technically true and revealed absolutely nothing. She learned things about him in return, not from what he said, but from what he didn't. He already knew the menu by heart. He always arrived precisely 7 minutes before the dinner reservation block began. He watched the room while talking to her, his gaze moving in the slow, habitual arc of someone trained to monitor for exits and threats. He was not simply a businessman. She was nearly certain of it. And she was nearly certain he had arrived at the same conclusion about her. The night he made her laugh, genuinely laugh, unguarded, for the first time she could remember, he had been telling her a story about a container ship that arrived at Incheon with a manifest declaring 32 crates of Korean cultural pottery. The actual contents discovered during inspection were 47 refrigerators, 6 motorcycles, and 1 live goat. The customs officer, Min-jae said, with complete seriousness, had written heritage item on the goat's processing paperwork. The laugh came out before she could stop it. Sharp, real, surprised. And she stood in his section looking for one unguarded moment, like someone who had briefly forgotten they were hiding. He watched her the way he always watched her, but there was something warmer in it now. "You should do that more," he said. "Do what?" "That." She composed herself. "Can I get you the dessert menu?" "Jasmine." Her name said quietly, not as a summons, not as a question, but as a word he had been turning over in his mind for some time and had finally decided to set down in the air between them. It made her go very still. "I know you are more than you let people see. I'm not asking you to explain yourself. I'm only telling you, whatever you're running from, it is not catching up to you in my company." She held his gaze for 5 full seconds. "Dessert menu," she said. "Yes or no?" He smiled. It was the first complete smile she'd seen from him, and it rearranged his face into something entirely different. Something that made him look like a person rather than a position. "Yes," he said, while those conversations were unfolding at corner tables. Hannah Park was working. She had run Jasmine Carter through every accessible system. Immigration records, employment databases, international watch lists, financial histories, and received exactly the output she had expected from a competently constructed false identity. Almost nothing. An address, a valid work permit, an American Social Security number attached to a thin credit history with no unusual activity and no meaningful digital presence. Hannah was patient. She started pulling threads rather than searching databases. She mapped what wasn't there: the absence of college enrollment, the missing medical records, no employment history before 37 months ago, no government photographs older than 38 months, tax filings that began from a fixed and deliberate point in time and stretched back no further. 37 months. She marked the date and worked backward from it. 6 weeks later, she was sitting across from Minjai with a sealed file and an expression he couldn't entirely read. "Her real name," Hannah said, "is Jasmine Rhodes." She set the file on the desk and opened it. "Intelligence analyst, cross-agency, American and international maritime security operations, 8 languages, evaluated internally as exceptional in infiltration architecture and lateral analysis under operational pressure." She paused. "Declared missing 3 years ago. Investigation closed 6 months later. No confirmed death. Designation unresolved." Minjae looked at the photograph inside the file. An airport, 3 years ago. Surveillance quality image. The woman in the photograph had shorter hair and wore a heavy coat, and her face carried the particular blankness of someone who had just received catastrophic news and was doing the work of not showing it. "Why was she hiding?" he asked. "Her father, Marcus Rhodes, logistics expert, port infrastructure, shipping route analysis. He died in what the official report calls an industrial accident at a Busan facility. Crane malfunction, standard documentation. But the incident report was filed 14 hours post-event. 3 of the 4 witnesses on record were employed by a shell company registered to Daekwang Maritime Holdings." She held his gaze. "Which is a primary vehicle of Daehyun Cho." The silence in the room had weight. Minjae closed the file, stood, walked to the window. Seoul arranged itself below him. Glass towers and river bridges, and the particular kind of order that a city projects when it wants to appear comprehensible. "She doesn't know we know," he said. "No. She believes she's still invisible. For now." He was quiet for a long time. "Arrange a private meeting," he said. "Not at the restaurant." A pause. "Tell her I have information about her father." The address Hannah texted her resolved to a building registered to a holding company Jasmine spent 40 minutes trying to trace before she gave up and went anyway. She arrived at the specified time wearing a gray coat and flat shoes, and the expression she used when she had prepared herself for things to go badly. She was carrying nothing except a phone and the specific alertness of someone who had already mapped 3 exits. Minjae was at the window when she entered. He turned. They looked at each other across the room, and something happened that didn't require words. Both of them simultaneously stopped performing. No restaurant, no social architecture, no careful calibrations. Just 2 people who were done pretending the other didn't know something important. She sat down. "Talk," she said. He talked. He told her that Marcus Rhodes had spent the last 18 months of his life running a private intelligence operation, off every official grid, funded by a quiet coalition of maritime security contacts who understood what he was building. He had been gathering evidence against Dae Hyun Cho's network: ghost vessels, falsified manifests, illegal cargo running through 6 international ports, customs officials bribed in 4 countries, 3 Korean ministries compromised, and Marcus had been the first person in nearly a decade to get close enough to prove it. 3 weeks before he died, Minjae said, he created an archive. Everything he'd collected, ship manifests, financial transfers, testimony transcripts, route maps, coded intelligence documentation. He paused. He didn't file it with any agency, because he didn't trust the agencies anymore. So he hid it. Jasmine was completely still. He hid it in someone, she said almost to herself. Minjae said nothing. The cipher, she continued. Her eyes moved to the middle distance as something deep and long buried rose in her chest. He taught me a cipher when I was 14 years old. He said it was a puzzle. We worked on it for 3 months at the kitchen table. She stopped. Something moved across her face that she didn't try to manage. I thought it was just something he did because he liked puzzles, because he liked having something that was ours. He trained you to decode it, Minjae said quietly. Specifically you, not an agency partner, not a colleague, his daughter. He knew, she said. It came out smaller than she'd intended, more exposed. He knew they were going to kill him. The room was very quiet. Outside the window, Seoul continued in its indifferent, relentless way. We found the storage location 2 months ago, Minjae said. Encrypted drives. The encryption uses his cipher system. Our best analysts have been working on it for 63 days. They cannot pass the 3rd layer. She looked at him directly. And you believe I can? I believe you're the only person alive who can. She was quiet for a long time. Long enough that it wasn't a pause. It was a decision being made, fully and honestly, the way decisions should be made. Why should I trust you? She asked. He didn't deflect it. You shouldn't, he said. Not yet. But your father built the archive so that it couldn't be unlocked by the wrong person at the wrong time. You're here. The time is now. A pause. You can leave this room. I won't stop you. I won't have you followed. Whatever you decide, I'll respect it. She studied his face with the precision of a person trained to read micro-expressions and breath patterns, and the small dissonances between what someone says and what their body tells the truth about. He gave her almost nothing to read. His expression was controlled but not performed. His breathing was level. His hands rested loosely on the table. Counterintuitively, it was the stillness that decided her. People hiding something worked hard to control their faces. People telling the truth simply told it. 2 days, she said. Take 3. She stood up. You knew who I was before tonight. Yes. How long? 3 weeks. She processed this. You didn't report me to the agencies. You didn't use it as leverage. You didn't hand me over. No. Why not? He was quiet for a moment. When he answered, it was in the tone of a man sharing something he hadn't planned to share. Because whoever you were running from, he said, deserved to be run from. She left without another word. She came back in 2 days. The secure residence was a townhouse in a quiet eastern district. Clean, functional, protection embedded into the structure in ways that wouldn't be visible from the street. Minjae's intelligence team occupied the lower floors. The encrypted drives were loaded onto a private network with no external access. Jasmine sat down in front of the screens on a Tuesday morning and began. For 8 days, she barely slept. The cipher her father had built was extraordinary, layered not just with encryption, but with deliberate misdirection, dead ends engineered to exhaust any analyst who didn't carry the underlying logic in their body. She carried it in hers. It was built into her, assembled across 3 months of kitchen table evenings when her father had spoken to her the way someone speaks to a person they trust completely, patiently, clearly, believing in her capacity before she had earned it. She decoded the first layer on day 2, the 3rd layer on day 4, the 5th on day 6. Each layer opened onto something that made the next more urgent. Ghost vessels operating under falsified registration. 12 ships moving cargo that had no legitimate origin. Port manifests altered systematically across 6 international locations. Financial transfer records, signed communications, Photographs of meetings that had officially never occurred. The architecture of 30 years of criminal infrastructure, documented with the methodical care of a man who understood that he might not live to present it in person and needed it to be unassailable without him. And at the center of it, Dae-hyun Cho, 71 years old, publicly retired, privately the owner of an apparatus that had outlasted every investigation through the simple practice of ensuring that people who could testify against him developed a habit of disappearing first, like Marcus Rhodes. Jasmine worked with a fury she didn't name aloud. She worked the way her father had worked, with the understanding that some things once seen cannot be unseen, and that the work is not optional. Min-jae brought food at irregular hours and never interrupted. Sometimes he sat across the table from her, reading his own documents, and she found, to her own faint surprise, that his presence was easier than silence, less demanding than emptiness. He occupied space without filling it unnecessarily. On the fifth night, past 2 in the morning, she looked up from the screen and said, without particularly meaning to, "He used to whistle while he worked. My father. The same 3 bars of something, over and over. I never knew what song. Just those 3 bars on repeat, for hours." Min-jae looked up from his papers. "He sounds like someone who was genuinely content doing what he did," he said. "He was." She pressed her knuckles briefly against her mouth. "Until he started seeing things he couldn't unsee. Until the work changed into something with more weight than he'd bargained for." A pause. "The last time I saw him, I was angry. I told him he was going to get himself killed and he needed to stop, that the work wasn't worth it." Min-jae said nothing. "He told me that some things you see, you can't choose to ignore. That it wasn't about him, it was bigger than him. I told him it was about me, about whether I would still have a father." She exhaled. "He looked at me like both things were true at once, and he couldn't give me the answer I wanted." "They were both true," Min-jae said quietly. "Yours and his. Both of them at the same time." She looked at him across the dim table, surrounded by her father's coded life, and felt something move in her chest that was neither grief nor fear. Something older than both. The specific, disorienting feeling of being genuinely understood by someone you hadn't expected. "Your brother," she said. "You mentioned it once." He hadn't offered more. She hadn't pushed. He was quiet for a long time. "Shipping accident," he said finally. 10 years ago. He was 26, junior level, looking into port irregularities. Nothing that should have been dangerous. The vessel went down in calm water. Official report, mechanical failure." He paused. "I've spent 10 years unable to prove otherwise." She held his gaze. "Is that why you're doing this?" "Partly," he said, "and partly because some things you see, you can't choose to ignore." She heard her father's words in his. Neither of them spoke for a long time. On day 7, an informant didn't check in. By evening, they had confirmation. The man had been a port inspector, lower level but with access to cargo manifests that corroborated the ghost vessel's routes. He'd been working with Min-jae's team for 4 months. He was found in a Busan parking structure. An hour later, Hana showed Jasmine a still image from a security camera without preface. A man in a maintenance uniform standing outside their building, looking up. 40 minutes ago, Hana said. Min-jae entered the room. He looked at Hana, then at Jasmine. "They know you're alive," he said. "Calculation, not alarm. Someone folding new information into an equation already in motion." "I know," Jasmine said. She was looking at the 7th layer of the cipher, which had just begun to yield. Her hands were steady on the keys. "They'll expect you to run," he said. "I know." "Are you going to?" A line of code resolved. Behind it, the final section of the archive began to populate. Coordinates, timestamps, a location. "No," she said. "I'm almost done." The following morning, a warning arrived through the restaurant. Flowers delivered to the velvet crane with no sender name, and folded into the paper wrapping, a single card. "Stop digging. The ground will swallow you." Min-jae read it, set it on the table, looked at her. "Poetic," she said flatly. "Cho always liked theater," he said. "So do I," she said. "Let's give him a show." On the 8th day, she finished. The final archive section, fully decoded, revealed a shipment. Not goods, but physical documentation. Original testimony records. Signed ministerial communications. Irrefutable financial transfer evidence. The kind of material that could not be digitally destroyed and had no conceivable innocent explanation. Moving through Busan Harbor in 44 hours on a vessel called the Haiwung Star. If that ship reaches international waters, Minjai said, the documentation disappears. Cho will have prepared for this moment. He's been moving contingencies for years. Then we don't let it reach international waters, Jasmine said. The operation they assembled over the next 18 hours was called Nightfall. Busan Harbor at night was an active facility, surveillance cameras on known rotations, patrol cycles with a 6-minute communications blackout built into the schedule. They had 9 minutes between the northern patrol sweep and the arrival of the secondary circuit. 9 minutes to board, locate the cargo hold, extract the documentation, and transmit the contents to a secure international archive where 3 separate agencies were standing by to receive it. One window, one chance. Jasmine suited up without speaking. Hana checked her earpiece. Minjai stopped in front of her before they moved out and looked at her with the most honest expression she had ever seen on him. "You don't have to take the front position," he said. "He was my father," she said simply. He held her gaze for a long moment. Then he stepped aside. The harbor at 3 in the morning was enormous and dark, and smelled of brine and diesel and the particular silence of industrial space after the day shift goes home. Massive container stacks blocked the moonlight in grid-like shadow. They moved in 2 teams. Jasmine led the first with Tyson, former maritime enforcement, methodical and quiet, and Yujin, who had the particular focus of someone who resolved problems with precision and economy. They hit the 9-minute window exactly. First 4 minutes, approach, secondary access entry, descent to cargo level. The world above muffled by walls of steel. 5th minute, Jasmine on her knees in front of the container's internal lock mechanism, working through it. It should have taken 12 minutes. It took her 3. Minutes 6 and 7. Documentation extracted from the internal sealed case. Transmission initiated. The file began moving through the secured channel in packets, each one confirmed. Minute 8. A voice from the far end of the cargo hold. "I wondered if you would be arrogant enough to come yourself." He stepped into the beam of their equipment. An old man, heavier than his photographs, moving slowly but with the complete confidence of someone who had spent decades ensuring that every person who threatened him stopped being a threat. He had 2 men behind him. Min Jae's team was covering the upper access and would be down in approximately 90 seconds. 90 seconds is a long time. "Jasmine Rhodes," Daehyun Cho said, drawing the name out slowly, examining it. "Marcus Rhodes' daughter. I'd heard you'd gone to ground." He shook his head with something that almost resembled regret. "I thought you were smarter." "The transmission is 60% complete," she said. Her voice was even. "You can't stop it now." "Perhaps not." He studied her. "You have his eyes." He had that same quality, that complete belief that doing the right thing provides some kind of protection. He smiled with genuine amusement. "You know what your father was? A good man who thought goodness was armor. It isn't. He died with his principles and his files, and the world moved on in a week. Nobody came looking. Nobody came to the funeral. Nobody remembered him." Something rose in Jasmine's chest. Something that had been waiting 3 years to find its right container, and had just found it. She took 1 step forward. "You're wrong," she said. Her voice didn't waver. "About the funeral, you may be right. But about whether any of it mattered?" She looked at him with the steady clarity of a person who has arrived, finally, at the thing they came to say. "You spent 3 years hunting an archive you couldn't find. 3 years monitoring border crossings and watch lists for any sign of his work resurfacing. You had people watching for my name in agency databases. You killed an innocent man to slow down a process that was already in motion." She held his gaze. "That is not the behavior of a man who believes his opponent was insignificant. That is the behavior of a man who knew, every single day for 3 years, that he had not finished what he started. That somewhere out there was something he'd missed. That Marcus Rhodes had been exactly right, and it was going to come back for him." She paused. "You didn't bury my father's work. You spent 3 years being afraid of it." The confirmation tone in her earpiece was clean and definitive. Min-jae's voice. It's done. They have everything. From the upper access, the sound of his team moving down. From beyond the steel walls, the growing sound of harbor authority vessels converging. Vessels that had been given very specific, very immediate authorization to move. Dae-hyun Cho's expression changed. Slowly. A structure meeting the weight it was not built to carry. He looked at her for a long time. Your father would be proud, he said. It was his final arrow. He aimed it to hurt. I know, she said. The sun came up over Busan Harbor the way it always does. Thorough and impartial, filling every corner without discrimination, turning the flat water gold and the container stacks copper and the exhausted faces of people who had been awake all night into something softer than they felt. Jasmine sat on a concrete barrier at the dock's edge and watched it. She wasn't crying. She had moved past crying into the clear, open exhaustion that lives on the other side of the thing you have been carrying alone for too long. She let her father's absence sit in her without compressing it or managing it or converting it into fuel for something useful. She just felt it, the full, specific, irreplaceable weight of him, the exact shape of who he had been, the whistling, the cipher, the voice that believed in her absolutely, the decision he had made that she had been furious about, and that she now understood with the same depth of the fury. Both things true at once. She sat there until the light changed. A week later, she took the coastal train to a memorial park above the sea, a place her father had mentioned once in passing, a place for maritime workers, anchors, and stone markers along a cliff path, with a view that understood the relationship between water and time. She found a bench that looked out over the gray-blue expanse, and she sat there for a long time. She didn't speak out loud, but she talked to him the way the living talk to the dead when they're alone in a place the dead once loved. Not in words exactly, but in the act of being fully present, carrying him there with her, letting him see through her eyes. She told him she had finished it. She told him she understood now why he had made the choice he made. She told him she was still angry about it, and that she understood it, and that both of those things would probably always be true simultaneously, and that she thought he had known that too, and had loved her through the contradiction of it without needing it resolved. She left a small stone on the top of the memorial railing. Then she walked back down the path with her hands loose at her sides, and for the first time in 3 years, the person walking was not Jasmine Carter or the operational ghost of Jasmine Rhodes. She was just Jasmine, and it was enough. And Seoul, around her, was a city she had chosen and been tested in and was still standing inside. That was enough too. 3 weeks later, the Velvet Crane closed 2 hours early on a Thursday evening. The event was small and unannounced. The kitchen staff sent home early, the lights set to low evening mode, the kind that made the restaurant look like something out of a memory. Min-jae had spoken to the owner, who asked no questions, because asking Min-jae Seo questions was a habit that tended not to reward itself. Jasmine walked through the empty dining room in a dark green silk dress, the first time in 3 years she had worn something that wasn't designed to help her disappear into a room. She moved slowly. She let herself feel the space. The tables where she had served 2 years of careful, anonymous dinners. The kitchen entrance she had memorized on her first week. The window section where a man with a quiet kind of power had sat in a corner table and asked her why Seoul, and she had refused to answer. She stood at the window now and looked out over the skyline, the Han River bridges, the tower lights reflecting in the water, the city doing what cities do, indifferent and beautiful and continuous. She heard him enter behind her. She didn't turn immediately. They had built enough between them, over 8 days and long nights and a shared understanding of grief, that his presence didn't require announcement. When he stood beside her at the window, they were quiet together for a while, the kind of quiet that doesn't need filling. What happens now? She asked. 3 governments have opened formal investigations, he said. The documentation is in protective custody across 4 separate secure repositories. Cho's network architecture is fully exposed. The ghost vessels are being flagged and seized. Shell companies are dissolving. He paused. Your clearance has been formally reinstated. Your name removed from every watch list. You exist again, officially. I can exist again, she said almost to herself. She looked at the city. I've spent 3 years building a life around being invisible. I'm not sure I remember what it feels like to just be somewhere. He turned to look at her. His expression was unguarded in a way she had only seen from him once before, in the operation room, late at night, when he had told her the truth about his brother. The look of a man who has decided finally to stop protecting himself from the thing he feels. You could stay, he said. 2 words. A door inside them, standing open. No pressure, no performance. She held his gaze for a long time, and a quiet warmth moved through her chest that she recognized as something she had not felt in years. Not romance exactly, not yet, but something that made room for it. The knowledge that a person had seen her clearly and had not flinched. You could stop requesting my section every time, she said, and start calling me. The corner of his mouth curved into the smile she had come to know. The real one, the one that made him look like himself. I was told, he said, that you have a good ear. And an excellent memory, she said. He laughed, low and genuine and unguarded. She had heard him laugh fully only a handful of times, and each time it arrived like something that had been stored elsewhere and was glad to be released. They stood together at the window of the restaurant where they had both been watching each other for months. In the city they had each chosen for their own complicated and unfinished reasons, with Seoul's nightlight filling the glass around them. And Jasmine understood that her father had built an archive to bring down a criminal empire, and that the archive had done its job. But that was not the real inheritance he had left her. The real inheritance was the cipher at the kitchen table, the 3 bars of a song she never learned the name of, the voice that believed in her before she had earned it, the decision he had made that had cost everything, and the thing he had hidden inside his daughter before he went. Not a code, not a file, not a key. Courage. He had hidden his courage inside her and trusted her to find it at the right time, and she had. She had come to Seoul to disappear. She had burned her name and her history and the version of herself that grief had been dismantling from the inside. She had poured tea and answered in Korean and constructed invisible walls around everything that mattered and called it survival. And still, through a harbor dialect she shouldn't have known, and a man who kept returning to a corner table, and a cipher that turned out to be a letter written years in advance by someone who loved her enough to plan for the worst and trust her with it, she had not disappeared. She had arrived, and Seoul outside the window continued. Bridges and rivers and towers full of lives being lived and choices being made, and the particular, irreducible fact of existing in the world as the person you actually are, without apology, without disguise. For the first time in 3 years, Jasmine Rhodes looked at it and thought, I'm home. If this story moved something in you, if you found yourself holding your breath somewhere in that harbor, or sitting with Jasmine at that memorial by the sea, or hoping quietly for 2 people who found each other across a restaurant table and a lifetime of grief, then we want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell us what you felt. Every comment means everything to this channel. Subscribe so you never miss what comes next. Hit the like button. It helps us tell more stories like this one and reach more people who need them. This is Afro Soul Tales. We build worlds here, and we are just getting started.